This week, you'll want to keep a close eye on the tropics as we're watching a high potential storm which may become our next U.S. landfalling hurricane. Even if that storm doesn't form, there is still going to be highly impactful weather across a good chunk of the U.S., many of us seeing a soaking rain. But even if you're not in a place where it's going to rain or where there may be a hurricane landfall, the pattern is shifting quickly as we head through the last full week of September. Up ahead, we got a lot to cover, and it's all going to start with the tropics. In fact, our system we're watching is on your screen right there on the bottom. That cluster of clouds out by Cuba down towards the Yucatan, we're going to jump into that and its potential impacts coming soon this week. The National Hurricane Center has continued to increase their chances at a potential developing tropical cyclone, and the potential for it to be a hurricane here is very real. You can see that red outlined region here in the Gulf just recently upgraded to an 80% chance for tropical development, and that path it would be on, you can see, would take it right up to the U.S. This is over the next week. In fact, if I show you over the next 2 days what the forecast is for this, it's a 40% chance at tropical development. That tells you this thing is going to get going sooner than later, and it will have significant potential impacts in the United States. Again, given that track and given how favorable these conditions are for development. You know, last week we were talking about a storm that did end up making landfall in the U.S. as a hurricane, and that was under forecasted originally. So the concern is the same with this one, that it isn't a place where it can ramp up fast, and that obviously presents some serious concerns. But enough of looking at it right now because it still is just an area to monitor. Let's take a look at some of the forecast tracks for this and discuss why it may be such a big problem for the United States and such a big concern for those who live on the Gulf. As we take a look at some of our computer data here, there's a couple things to keep a close eye on. One is that red L you're seeing on your screen right here. That's going to tell you where the consensus is for the center of the storm. But you also have some of these individual small numbers around here. Those are different outcomes, and as a whole, they'll give you a range of possibilities. So without further ado, I'm going to put this in motion. And what you're looking at here is where the storm will be at the very beginning of Thursday. So we're getting into the Gulf just on Thursday. That said, the pattern more recently has favored this to move faster. So it's going to move pretty quickly starting on Thursday towards the Gulf. Here we are Thursday morning still, and notice that you're seeing that purple color become more defined. That's the storm strengthening. Now, it rushes through the Gulf of Mexico on Thursday. Here we are now early Friday, and it's closing in on what would be a U.S. landfall. And what I'm seeing in the data right now would suggest that this would be a hurricane at landfall. That does seem to be the consensus, in fact. Now, here's what's a little bit different. You can see we have some of those ranges of possibilities on land already. That's suggesting landfall could come as early as later Thursday. However, we have a few stragglers back here, too. And those would suggest that landfall, it could still be delayed. So the timing that we're working with here is still quite uncertain. Now, you'll notice that some of those numbers, though, you can see 80s on them. That tells you the storm is still pretty strong. At least I'm telling you, that's what it's suggesting. So whether it goes faster or slower, this storm has high potential either way, but the timing will need to watch. Will it be Thursday or may it hold off till Saturday? Regardless, we'll move it forward further. This is the European model, by the way. And here we're seeing a projected landfall somewhere on the Florida Panhandle. So this area is certainly, at the moment, the most intriguing in terms of potential impacts. Again, this is Sunday we're making this video. We're talking about a potential landfall on Friday. There's going to be some changes, but if you're anywhere in this vicinity, I'd say honestly anywhere from the Louisiana down towards the Gulf coastline of Florida, in that area, you do need to be watching this as we head through this week. It does have very high potential. Now I'm going to talk about our American model here, just to give you a wider range of outcomes beyond just that. And what you're going to see is something very similar. Our storm begins to move into the Gulf here. This is now actually earlier. This is the start of Wednesday, although it moves through the Gulf a little slower on the American model. Here we are early Thursday, and I also want to point out that you're seeing a much wider range of possibilities here than we saw in the Euro. So we're seeing the American model offer more uncertainty in terms of where the storm is going to go. That said, it's still projecting a strong storm no matter what. The strength of this is certainly what's concerning because there is most agreement on it becoming a hurricane right now. Notice though on our American model, here we are now early Friday. It is beginning to approach more so the Florida coastline between Tampa and Tallahassee as opposed to the coastline a little bit closer to Alabama and Mississippi. Here we are, though. Again, there's our wide range of possibilities out here. Still some stragglers out in the Gulf, but certainly suggests landfall may be more likely somewhere along this portion of the coastline. Again, it's Sunday. We're looking at data that will be updated through the week. But right now, I'm telling you, if you live in any of these areas, you do need to be thinking about late week. What am I going to do if there is a hurricane that will be making landfall? And right now, like I said, the consensus seems to be that there will be a hurricane landfall. We still have a lot to watch, but you do need to take the storm seriously, no matter where you live, no matter how you spin it. But that's not the only thing we have to watch this week. In fact, we have a lot of impactful weather just off the Gulf, too, in the southeast, on the eastern half of the U.S. I'm going to take a look now with you guys at which areas may see sun this week, but the many that may see rain and who may see flooding regardless of a hurricane forming. One of the things I always look at first before getting into the forecast for the United States is the upper level pattern. And this week, it's really important. So let me show you what I'm looking at here. And what's going to stand out to you is that we have a lot of these troughs, as we call them. Anytime you see those colors sort of bowing down like that, you can see another trough here. That's where you have more of that inclement weather. You even have this trough extending really more so out here. There's a lot of different waves of energy across in the U.S. right now, more or less. So if I put this in motion, you're going to see just how active this week remains. And what we have here is moving into Monday, this trough really digging through the central part of the U.S. And this could definitely bring some rain and potential flooding to that portion of the country. But that's not the only system, of course, we need to watch. As I move it forward here, you can see this sort of breaks off. We may have this closed off low down here, and that, again, could contribute to bad weather across portions of the Midwest and potential flooding too. Meanwhile, we have this trough now digging into the Northeast. It's going to keep our weather busy out there as we get into the middle and later days of this week as well. However, I'll also point out we have a ridge that develops across the plains, and that's going to keep our weather very, very different there relative to areas in the eastern half of the United States. But we don't stop there. There's another trough late week that digs into the Pacific Northwest and may bring some active weather and rainy weather out there too. So a lot going on this week, as you can see. Luckily, once we head into the weekend, we do begin to see this trough begin to move off the northeast, but this one's really hanging on to the northwest. And this ridge, I mean, this is going to be an interesting player here. What happens with the ridge, how long it stands strong, and if this upper low and potential hurricane have anything to do to impact the weather across much of the country, because that could really break down the entire ridge we're talking about here. And we're going to take a look at some of the stuff going on closer to the surface and break down this forecast for you further here. So I wanted to start with our total precipitation here because it gives you an idea of how many of you will see rain this week. And I'm going to move this forward as we head through Monday into Tuesday here. You're looking at Wednesday now, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and of course Sunday. So over the course of the week, anyone seeing that shading there is likely to see rain. Now you can see basically everybody east of the Mississippi is expected to see some rainfall this week. Some of it significant. In fact, if you have that red shading or especially gold shading, that's where we're talking about, decent chance for some flooding rain and at least 1 or 2 days this week. But you'll also notice that in the Pacific Northwest, but you have that area. Remember we mentioned that ridge? Well, you can see it carved out pretty well on our map here across the plains region. And more or less what you're seeing is the influence of that ridge. Now, it's going to be across the Rockies, across the plains, even portions of the West Coast will stay sunny. But as a whole, we are expecting impactful weather for a good chunk of the U.S. this week. So that is a big piece of our story here. Now, I wanted to show you where, or at least time out where this rain is going to be. And we're going to use our same source here, except we're going to switch to the European model. And I'm going to basically give you an idea of what our storm system will look like as it approaches the Gulf too. So here we are, starting with Monday right now. You're seeing a storm system right now across portions of the, we'll call it it's like the southern plains, southern Midwest there. We also have some rain that's sweeping into the mid-Atlantic. That should dry out pretty quick, and you'll see that ahead here. But what does not change is that this storm system right here in the Midwest, it's going to stick around for a little bit. It's going to move slowly, and it's going to produce the potential for some flooding rain in portions of the Midwest, perhaps Monday and Tuesday this week. So we're watching that first and foremost. Now, this system is eventually going to move into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, where it has the potential to do the same thing, produce some flooding rain here. But it becomes more complex because now we're adding 2 more systems to the mix here. Remember we talked about that trough in the Northwest? Well, here we are as we head into Wednesday and Thursday. That area is talking about rain, and we also have our potential hurricane coming in the Gulf here. So while the Northeast is going to see some rain and impactful weather, it won't ever really be the focal point because we have such an active week. But that said, if you're in the Northeast, Thursday looks like a day where it could be a bit soggy. Friday potentially too. I'll move this forward, but we're going to begin to take a look at the Gulf now more than anything else. This is the European model's rendition of the storm. I would not take this verbatim, but it gives you an idea of what we may be looking at. This would be a hurricane landfall, and it's likely, like I said, to be somewhere on the Louisiana or Florida coastlines. Anywhere in that range, at least, I would be keeping a close eye on it. And again, it's a storm that hasn't even developed yet, but the potential is high enough that you really need to watch closely. I can't say that enough. But this is where we have the second round potential flooding rain. And you can obviously see in the southeast, we have our storm making landfall, dumping rain in those areas. But remember that upper level low, that sort of bubble we saw on the ridge? Now, we'll need to watch this again for many of those same areas, that southern plains, southern Midwest region, because we may see more flooding rain here and in the southeast here simultaneously with two separate storm systems both kind of doing their thing. And as we head into the late week, this is Friday, now Saturday, and even into Sunday here. Sunday, there is some improvement, but our weather generally stays unsettled, and there could be some pretty big impacts across a good chunk of the southeastern U.S. Also notice by the weekend, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, while there will be rain this week, likely mid and late week, it should be better by the weekend. Certainly, though, a lot of impactful weather in these areas. Now, before we move on, I do want to also talk about the temperatures because obviously rain has a big impact on temps. But I will say this week does appear to be a little on the milder side as a whole. So what you're going to see, and not by much, but what you're going to see here is Monday we're looking at those orange colors featuring above average temperatures, blue colors below average. We're seeing near average temperatures across much of the country. Nothing really stands out here to me. If we move it into Tuesday, you're seeing again more orange than blue, so milder, especially if you're in the west here. That's that ridge developing. Here we are on Thursday. Now it's becoming cooler in the eastern half of the U.S. because there's rain falling, right? Western U.S., though, that's what that ridge is going to do if you live in some of the Rockies. That's where you have temperatures that are going to be getting to 10 to even 15 degrees above average out there. 20 degrees above average, not out of the question either. Here we are on Thursday. You can see just how warm it is in those areas, and even into Friday, that ridge is going to keep things very sunny, very warm in the Rockies and portions like the northern plains. So a big difference in the weather there relative to the rest of the U.S. If you live in those parts of the country, enjoy the sun. Enjoy what's going to be a sort of a late summer-like week. Here we are as we get into the weekend, though. Things begin to moderate again. Still very warm if you're on the west coast out towards the north central U.S. A little bit cooler or near average everywhere else. And on Sunday, similarly speaking, we may moderate a bit in the north central U.S., but it's the western U.S. here, those Rockies, that area, that's really going to be doing very well in this situation too. Now, we can also take a look at actual temperatures, and we'll just go over these real quick now that we've covered the anomalies. But I want to take a look at just how high some of those highs out farther west are going to be. Most of the eastern U.S. Is going to be, again, near average, so 70s, 60s. But you'll see as we're into Monday here, it's very warm in the west coast. We're looking at California down through Arizona in the 90s. Even the southeast U.S. could be very warm to start the week, near 90 degrees. Here we are on Tuesday. You're seeing that warmth in the southeast beginning to abate a little bit. Still very warm, actually hot in the western U.S. The valley in California there, got a chance to be in the mid to upper 90s. We're very hot in Arizona, sort of the desert southwest out there too. On Thursday, you're seeing highs again begin to abate a little bit. Still hot in the desert southwest, but we're not seeing the same kind of heat in the southeast as that storm approaches, and the west coast catching a little bit of a break as that trough comes in. On Thursday, that's where those warmer temperatures begin to take over in the Plains region and the Rockies. You're seeing pretty widespread 80s out there. On Friday, same deal, widespread 70s and 80s where that ridge is, where the sun's shining. And on Saturday, we begin to see that high heat begin to retreat, but still very warm in a good chunk of the country out there. We're talking about, again, just generally the western U.S., but even through the Plains region, at least warmer than average, which for this time of year can even be upper 70s, and depending on exactly how far north you live. Then by the time we get towards the end of the week here, across the country as a whole, we're talking about temps that should be pretty close to average, but certainly an active week of weather. That's going to impact temperatures And those storm systems, too, will impact how warm or cool it's going to be. My main focus, though, is going to be if you're in the Rockies, if you're in the Northern Plains, it's going to be warm, it's going to be sunny. Enjoy it. I'm not too concerned about dangerous heat. Could be a little bit in the West Coast to begin the week, go through the middle of the week. But it really is those storm systems this week that are going to take center stage here. The potential for flooding, especially in the Midwest, and the heavy rain that's going to fall in the Southeast as that potential hurricane approaches. Northeast, it's going to be rainy, but nothing too dangerous out there, luckily. Now, before we wrap this up, I do want to take a quick look at fall foliage because some areas, especially with some of these cooler temps, will be reaching peak colors as we look forward at the upcoming week. So here's that fall foliage map, and everywhere you're seeing yellow colors, that's basically any high terrain or anywhere north. That's where you have low color beginning to show up. You're seeing some yellows on trees, perhaps. Unhealthy trees definitely showing color. But what's exciting is that across some of the Rockies and across what you're going to see, some of the peaks in the Northeast, we may see peak color begin to emerge later this week. I was going to say peak color peak out later this week, but I didn't want to say that word too many times. Thought it'd be funny though. Anyway, but if we take a look at the late week here, you're seeing again in the Rockies, anywhere you're seeing that sort of dark red color, that is peak color emerging. And that's going to be, again, any of the highest terrain out here in the Rocky Mountain region. You're even seeing some areas that could be past their peak this week. And in New England, look at that peak color emerging again. Those dark red colors on our map here in the mountains of northern New England. So some excitement on that end of things, and certainly we are a bit ahead of schedule in many portions of the country, especially New England right now. I can tell you we're about a week ahead of schedule, at least a half a week ahead of schedule in terms of peak colors. So they're coming out, and if you're into that kind of thing, seeing the fall foliage and stuff, I mean, really, who isn't? This is a week to start thinking about when you might want to plan a trip to wherever that best place to see colors is for you, as we're just getting into that season. And I'll move this forward a little farther, just one more week to give you a sneak peek. Here's what we'd be looking at as we move into the first full week of October. This is where we're expected to see peak color in some of the lower terrain across the northern U.S. You can see it high color across a good chunk of the north central U.S., across New England too. This is October 6th. It's not even that long from now. So a lot to look forward to is just what I wanted to hammer home here. And like I said, if you're into fall foliage, this is what you have to look forward to over the next 2 weeks before, of course, even more of the country sees it later on in October. But it's always good to get a head start. I feel like getting those pictures in early, if you're a big photographer, people love to see those first looks. Once you get towards the end, I feel like, everyone's kind of seeing the colors. But this is what you want to be looking at in terms of foliage over the next week here. So we'll kind of wrap things up there. We covered the big stuff, of course, that potential hurricane landfall. If you're anywhere on the Gulf Coast, especially between Louisiana and even as far south as, we'll just say, Naples, Florida, I would be watching that storm very closely. Again, there's no guarantee it's going to be a hurricane, but the potential is very high with this. Regardless, if you don't live in the Gulf, remember, think about the potential for flooding rain where you are, especially if you're in the Midwest this week. The Northeast will see some rain later in the week, though I don't expect it to be dangerous. Same thing in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, we have some heat in the Southwest, on the part of the West Coast for a few days this week. But really the big winners this week seem to be the plains, where you're going to enjoy, especially the northern plains, where you have that warmth, you have a lot of sun. The weather's just going to be really nice out there. And again, we get that fall foliage beginning to pop. Always good to have something to look forward to, and that's certainly one of those things. I know out here in New England, people are getting really excited about it already, and for good reason. Should be a really good year for color, especially with how dry and sunny it's been in at least this part of the country. But anyway, we'll have weekly updates again every Sunday, so follow along here for those updates. We keep you posted with any kind of weather before it even happens. And if that storm ends up becoming really legit, we may have a special update in the middle of the week. So be sure to stay tuned, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. All right, see you guys next Sunday.